From Apuant Productions and WUWM, this is Classic Eats. I'm Kyle Johnson Cherek. On this episode of Classic Eats, we consider the 45th parallel that circles the globe and talk to Bill St. John. Bill is a former restaurant critic, has taught wine classes, has cooked on the Orient Express and made beer with Trappist monks. He's a Renaissance man in the culinary world. It's Classic Eats, the 45th parallel, and Bill St. John. But first, a story. It's 1943, and you're a German soldier in Rommel's North African Corps, sweating through another day under the blistering Libyan sun. The campaign that once seemed invincible is collapsing around you now that the English have the Americans on their side. Conscripted in 1942 as soon as you came of age, you've spent a year fighting heat and enemies alike, only to watch the whole thing crumble into surrender that May. You, among more than 250,000 other Axis troops, stand in a processing line, unable to imagine what the future holds. How could you, a German youth of 19 who had never traveled far beyond your northern German home of Melsdorf, ever expect this journey? From fighting beneath the North African sun to boarding a ship bound for America to a place called Door County, Wisconsin, where your youthful back and hard-working hands would be put to use as agricultural labor, offsetting all the young American men off fighting the war that your nation began. This slender-pointed peninsula of land, surrounded on three sides by the waters of Lake Michigan and Green Bay, has been transformed by a few cherry blossoms since the late 1800s into cherry orchards as far as the eye can see. More than 600 acres on one farm alone by the time your standard issue POW boots step onto its soil. But the list of what thrives along the 45th parallel stretches around the world like a string of pearls. The Rhone Valley in Bordeaux in France, where wines of incomparable character emerge from the soil. Piedmont in Italy, producing Barolo and Barbaresco. Stone fruit, apples, pears in Michigan's Leelanau Peninsula. The wheat fields of Minnesota, golden and endless. Ukraine's Danube region, the breadbasket for Europe. Oregon's Willamette Valley, where Pinot Noir grapes would one day rival Burgundy itself. You and 2,000 other German POWs have been brought 1/3 of the way around the world to pick small, red fruit. 7 bushels a day at least. So far from the battlefields of North Africa and the fumes of tanks and the scent of gunpowder, this pastoral incarceration will be your final legacy as a soldier of the Reich. Each bucket of cherries you pick connects you to this invisible thread circling the earth, this line of abundance you never knew existed. The war brought you here as a prisoner, but the 45th parallel, with its perfect balance of light and season, warm and cool weather, and its gifts for coaxing sweetness from the rocky soil, would teach you that some of Earth's most generous gifts require no army to claim, no conquest to secure. Just the right latitude, the right soil, and hands willing to harvest what grows there. Welcome to Classic Eats. I'm Kyle Johnson Cherek. This is a show about culinary history, why we eat what we eat, the people, the places, the scenes and situations that set the course for the way we dine. Each show, we pick a thing, a person, a drink, a movement, or an object that made its mark on what we call food. This week on Classic Eats, I sit down and connect with Bill St. John to talk about the mystery and the lore of the 45th parallel. How would you describe a Bill St. John in his own words?
Wow. I've had a very interesting life. I played the George Plimpton card a lot and did a lot of riding around the world, actually having done things. I made beer with the monks at Orval, for example, and lived with them for a week in the way they lived. I cooked on the Orient Express. I was able to get into the kitchen of the Orient Express train for one of its journeys from Venice to Paris and then on to London. Anyway, I've had an interesting life, a lot of cooking experiences, which has been very pleasurable for me. So, native of Denver, Colorado. I was, for the most of my professional life, was a journalist, reporter, restaurant critic. I wrote about wine and food, cooking, 17 years as a restaurant critic, and also a person who ran 2 wine schools in Denver and in Chicago, where I taught hundreds of classes over the years to a couple thousand, 3,000 people over all that time. Many classes on wine and wine appreciation and food and wine combinations. And
Well, you were recommended to me by, let's say, Wine Intelligentsia to reach out to you to talk about this phenomenon called the 45th parallel that goes around the globe. And the northern 45th parallel. We can talk about the southern one too. But within that parallel, it is just that latitude. It's just extraordinary how many things that we enjoy from a culinary standpoint, either eating or drinking, grow wonderfully right there. And
Right.
the science is that it's the midway point between the equator and the North Pole. And so it gets the wonderful amount of sunlight, not too much, not too little. It's the Goldilocks zone, right? Much like
Right.
the Earth is within our solar system. Rolls through Piedmont, Italy, and Lombardy, and Door County, and Leelanau, and the Rhone Valley, and I could go on and on and on. But it also goes through places like, the Gobi Desert in Siberia.
Yes, that's right.
So it isn't just magic pixie dust all the way around the globe. But I know that you've written about this and thought a great deal. So give me some of your perspectives on this 45th parallel phenomenon.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing for me is to note that it just simply is the place where food plants, grow best. Although people in the tropics would maybe deny some of that because they eat a lot of fruits and vegetables that grow in their area as well. But what they do in terms of, well, grapes grow best for making wine along the 45th parallel. Actually, from the 30th to the 50th is basically the
Right.
big band. The
Yeah.
45th is just a handy moniker or handle for that area right between the pole and the equator. But it just appears that many of our foodstuffs grow along that area, one of which is grapes. And they're edible, of course, but also they make this beverage called wine. And they are particularly good for making this beverage called wine. You can make any alcoholic beverage out of anything that has sugar in it. And there are a lot of foodstuffs around the world that have sugar in them. Citrus fruits, apples, and so forth. You can't make really good alcoholic beverage from citrus fruits, but as long as you have sugar and yeast, which can be wild yeast, it's that bloom on the outside of grapes is actually wild yeast cells. So they've got everything in one package. They've got everything to make wine. It's probably invented by mistake or by an error. Somebody probably sat on a bunch of grapes and came back a month later or a couple of weeks later and all discovered that this sloshy liquid gave them a buzz. And they said, well, let's do this on purpose from now on. But
And doesn't taste half bad either.
it doesn't taste half bad. That's the point. You can make a beverage you could call wine out of many different kinds of fruits. Like you could make apple wine or blueberry wine, or people have made all sorts of different things, but I don't call anything except grapes wine myself. Grapes are particularly good for making what we call wine. They have in their constitution things like acidities and some in red wines, tannins and structure give this beverage some kind of structure that other fruits don't have. And Vitis vinifera specifically does a particularly good job of producing wines that go well with food. I consider it a food, and that tastes good in combination with different kinds of foodstuffs. That's because the grapes themselves have a lot of liquid. They have a decent amount of sugar. They have good acidity, and that's a benefit of the 45th parallel. As you mentioned, it's not too hot, not too cool, but those warm days and cool nights it's an old sobriquet for really good winemaking. It helps retain that acidity, which gives it structure and snap. There's a big difference even in eating a peach between a peach that doesn't have any acidity and one that does. The peach with acidity always tastes a lot better than one that's just kind of flaccid with just sugar. And
That's perfectly put. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And it's the same with grapes. To retain that acidity, they need these cool nights, and that they find that along the 45th parallel.
You're listening to Classic Eats with Kyle Johnson Cherek. Today we're contemplating the 45th parallel, and my guest today is Bill St. John, a Renaissance man in the food and wine world. If I can ask just quickly, as a wine historian, or a historian of wine would be a better way to put it, we know that wine came out of somewhere in the the Middle East. The Syrah grape is thought to be the godfather of all grapes, and please correct me if I have my stories wrong. Do you have any evidence or even just instincts that once those grapes got out of the Levant and into that 45th parallel or close to, that there was an explosion of them? That's where an explosion of varieties and so many more grew and things like that. Is that a phenomenon?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that it's more apt to say that wine started in what we now call the country of Georgia.
Oh, that's right. Caspian Mountains, yes.
Caspian Mountains, not what we would call Persia, or where the people from Shiraz come from, or the Syrah grape is alleged to have come from. But that was about 8,000 years ago. That's a very long period of time for this phenomenon to occur. And I think most of the advances in winemaking have been in the last few hundred years. But it took several hundred years, a couple thousand years, really, for wine to move from the Levant or from the Caspian Mountain area through the great trading routes into the Mediterranean. And when it reached the Mediterranean, there you could say things started to explode. Grapes would be treated differently in order to make wine, and some of them developed their characteristics as, hybridization, self-hybridization, training by human beings. But this didn't happen for millennia before. Before you started taking that. Oh, this Cabernet grows well here, and Chardonnay grows well here. That was something that happened. Basically, I would think maybe just as few as 700 years ago.
So if the history of wine, say, if we boil those hours down into, or there's a millennia into an hour, the type of wine making and experiencing of wine that we have would really be in the last sort of 4 to 5 minutes of that hour, if I'm getting it correctly.
That's a good way to put it. If you had one of those like nuclear clocks going, this
right.
only happened a few minutes ago.
Right. And so it isn't just wine that grows at that 45th parallel so well, though that is your expertise. But in my understanding, that stone fruits grow beautifully, cherries through Door County and Leelanau, both those peninsulas, and they have other things that work in their benefit with the temperate water climates on both sides, because they're both peninsulas and Lake Michigan in the middle, and apples and so on and so forth. But can you expand a little bit more on the wines that do grow in those special regions, and really how they've gripped our connoisseurship and imagination, I think, in the last 700 years?
Yeah. It's interesting. A side note is that when I was living in Chicago, a group of some former students of mine and I got together, and we started to build a pilot for a television show that we wanted to market called Wine at 45. And
That's a great title. It's a great title.
Yeah, you could steal it now because the thing never sold. But we traveled to the Leelanau Peninsula ourselves, because the 45th parallel goes right across the top of the tip there. And there's a marker to that effect. But we wanted to show, we thought in the grand scheme of things that we would travel around the world, going to these different wine areas like Bordeaux and the southern part of Burgundy and the northern part of Piedmont,
and Rhone Valley and things like that.
Yeah, we would go to all these places and do sort of a travelogue, wine at 45.
And even the Willamette Valley in Oregon.
The Willamette Valley which is actually a warm district for Oregon itself. It's very temperate there. It's great for making. And then flip it over on the southern side. There's the Otago area of New Zealand and the Chilean areas and Argentina and South Africa too. So that it's a smaller band actually in the southern hemisphere, but it's the same principle in reverse or upside down. It goes back to my thing about the peach. I think foods are flavorful for many different reasons. They develop their fruit and vegetable esters and their molecules over a long period of time before harvest. If it goes quickly because it's a very warm season, you can grow, seasons of crops in a warmer climate, but they don't have the same kind of flavor that crops do when they grow over a long period of time. I
Right, the
mean,
complexity, yeah.
yeah, they don't develop the complexity of flavors that they do when they have a warm day and a cool night and followed by a warm day and a cool night. I mean, just take an example of a tomato. There's a great hullabaloo over the last 20, 50 years about, well, maybe the last 50 years, I suppose, on heirloom tomatoes. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I used to grow tomatoes in my backyard, and because I just adored the flavor of a vine ripened or plant ripened tomato. A simple tomato sandwich is heaven for me in the summertime, but they only
Yeah.
come about with tomatoes that grow over a season. These pink cardboard tomatoes that you get in the grocery stores just aren't hothouse tomatoes. Even just aren't.
Yep.
They just don't. They're a good example of not 45. Foodstuffs of all kind seem to flourish in the development of their characteristics along the 45th parallel, and you just see it from it's just sort of on the map.
Is it,
Um,
Bill? Is it do you think that because there's that inherent? I don't want to anthropomorphize fruits and vegetables, but there's an inherent struggle in their survival in the temperature changes.
yes,
I'm thinking of Dan Barber's winter carrots. Chef Dan Barber, who loves to have
right.
vegetables created specifically for his restaurant, but the winter carrots that go through that near frozen in the ground experience, and then warm soil and freeze. But by the end of it, he contends that they're as sweet as candy because the sugars are amped up each freeze and thaw cycle.
Yes, that's a very good point. And there's a subset of bunch of stories about grapes that grow for making wine. That if they don't struggle as they grow, they don't put the energy into their production that they could otherwise if they
Mm-hmm.
had it easy. And so there's this idea of like withholding water, growing on hillsides versus the flat valley floor that's very rich soil. If they have to
Mm.
struggle for looking for nutrients, if they look for water, if they have a difficult growing season, difficult in the sense only that it isn't made, the temperatures all day long aren't just made for ripening. They're made for
Mm-hmm.
for holding back and then pushing again, holding back,
Mm-hmm.
pushing again. The development of those flavonoids, these kinds of
Right.
things only come with struggle in some cases. And so you'll see that if you have it too easy, that is to say, if you have a lot of water, very nutrient rich soil, and lots of sunshine, you don't grow good tasting vegetables. You grow
Right.
vegetables that have fruit, that have flavors and sugars, but you don't grow ones that have snap or structure or length and flavor and the development of these flavonoids. And so all these kinds of things are all a function of this very temperate climate that goes in a band around the globe.
Yeah. So are you telling me, relative to fruits and vegetables, what my parents tried to drill into me my entire
Yeah,
life was that not everything should come easy and it builds character?
it's exactly what it is. If you're talking to a grapevine, you'd say, I know you don't have enough water today, but that'll be good for you in the long run, especially good for us. We're going to make some wine out of your grapes. Um,
Well, and when I think about winemakers, vineyards, or thinking in particular about Champagne, because that might be the most extreme, though you would have more perspective on this, where they really clip the vine and do all kinds of pruning and things like
right,
that to really constrain it and
exactly.
make it very difficult until the time when they want the fruit to come forth. And that's almost like, at least for Champagne that I know of, it's almost like a Camelot moment. And then it grows and it's picked and, on to the next, essentially.
That's right. If you notice a grapevine that's growing in the alleyway, I mean, in your backyard, you can notice that it will go wild.
Hmm.
Grapevines are very, very prolific. And so they just spread all that possible energy, whatever so that's 100 energy units. They spread it out all over the summer into all these different vegetations. If you cut all that back, they would still have the same amount of energy, but they put it in the production of fruit. Why? Because fruits are the seeds of the future, literally.
Right.
So it's just self-preservation. I've got to make some fruit. I can't just make green for
Yeah.
myself. I've got to make some fruit. And so if you
Yeah.
cut me back, I'll just make the fruit because that's the thing that I'm most interested in doing.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Bill St. John, who is a former food critic, wine expert, and we're contemplating the 45th parallel. What are your favorite wines that grow within that 45th parallel going around the globe? Do you have any favorites?
Yeah, well, over time, I've developed a real affinity for Burgundy, both white and red, mostly because of its great history, the way that the monks, the Benedictine monks especially, and the Carthusians saved wine making in that part of the Mediterranean from one generation of monks to the next over a period of 700 years. Passed their knowledge, tended the vines in a very careful way. It was for them a religious act, but it was also great agriculture. I've taught many courses on Burgundy, and the idea that there's a site specificity to many. Chambon-Musigny has many different vineyards, and each of them turns out a different kind of Pinot Noir, for example. I just found it almost romantic, the history of it and the way that the wines turned out with their extraordinary perfumes and their delicious flavors and their length of flavor and their affinity for food. And so I just fell in love with Burgundy. But there's many, many wines I've had over the years, thousands of them, right? I mean, just sampling wines for review purposes alone put so many things through my palate. But I love the wines of Piedmont a great deal, just for the same reason that I love Burgundy so much, because it has site specificity and the beautiful way that Nebbiolo wines mature. But I'm a fan of really well-made white wines as well. They have structure for food that I think is marvelous. I prefer white wine and cheese much more than red wine and cheese. White wine helps cheese taste better.
Well, Bill, this has been absolutely fascinating.
Well,
you're the consummate guest.
I think the history of food is fascinating. To me, it has always been fascinating.
Yeah. And thanks for pulling back the curtains on some of the, I guess, the lore and the mystery of the 45th parallel, because some folks absolutely subscribe to it and others think it's just a bit of a scientific fluke. I land very much leaning towards the lore, but I think there's substantive evidence of why things are so delicious that are grown there.
Yeah, because it's cool nights, warm days, long growing season, development of flavonoids, development of flavors and structure in the foods. You notice something to take from what you just said earlier, and that is some of the most delicious food is made up of simple ingredients, but the ingredients themselves must be very delicious, and they only get that way under certain growing conditions. They just simply don't if the plant has it very easy and has no time to develop these flavors. And so I think those are really key points, and that's why this 45th parallel to me is just not something to hang your coat on in terms of why foodstuffs of all kinds, grapes included, taste better from that band than they do from many others. Yeah.
Marvelous. Well, thank you, my friend.
It's been a pleasure.
That's our show. Special thanks to our guest, Bill St. John. It's Classic Eats with Kyle Johnson Cherek. Thanks for taking a seat at our table.
Classic Eats is created and hosted by Kyle Johnson Cherek and co-produced by Apuan Productions and WUWM.
Executive producers Kyle Johnson Cherek and Rob Schoonover. Audio editing and engineering by Brian Arkta and John Rymaszewski.
Thanks for taking a seat at the table with Classic Eats. You can hear this episode again and any others you've missed when you subscribe to Classic Eats, found wherever you listen to your podcasts.